The facts are frightening. More than half the population of Australia has now been impacted by cybercrime. Its cost to the country is at least $30 billion a year. And despite all the warnings, every 6 minutes there's a new report of someone becoming a victim of an online attack. Now, you mightn't like to hear this, but the war against cyber criminals can't be won. That doesn't mean we're surrendering, though. Far from it. When Sarah Luke moved to Byron Bay, she thought she'd be living a peaceful, stress-free life. From this secluded safe haven, she never imagined she could be accused of doing terrible things on the other side of the world.
I felt extremely vulnerable. I felt violated. It's been enormously distressing, actually.
Unlucky doesn't even begin to cover what happened to Sarah last October. She was one of 10 million Australians whose data was breached in the Medibank hack. Just a few weeks later, Sarah suspects that information was used to hack her PayPal account.
My understanding is that they were Russian hackers. They were using my account under my name to trade unauthorised merchandise, sporting merchandise, so Adidas and National Basketball Association merchandise, things like that.
What they were doing was using her account to sell counterfeit goods. And when those big brands found out, Sarah was in their sights. And overnight, this law-abiding mother of 4 went from a hacking victim to a defendant in 2 US lawsuits, up for $1.8 million in damages. What were you accused of?
Trading illegal merchandise and on charges of cyber squatting, trademark infringement, willful counterfeiting, IP infringement.
As extraordinary as it sounds, Sarah's situation isn't unique. Every 6 minutes, an Australian reports being hacked. The attacks are coming hard and fast from far and wide. Tonight, we take you inside Australia's online offensive.
I appreciate that initial advice on a potential cyber incident.
With rare access to the front line of this dangerous battle for cyber security.
We have to run hard at it.
The enemy is invisible.
These criminals are, if nothing else, they are adaptive.
A new era of warfare is upon us.
The need to be vigilant is profound.
And this is a battle our government can't afford to lose.
The sharpest, meanest people in the Australian government are there online finding people who would try to harm Australians.
Rachel Noble doesn't look like one of the meanest people in the government, but she's certainly one of the sharpest. In fact, she's one of our nation's most cunning spies. Her job is to hack the hackers, and she's showing us an undercover operation designed to disrupt and destroy cyber criminal networks. So this is the dark web. It looks very much like any legitimate chat forum.
It sure does. It looks a lot like a sort of any online chat forum. What you see here is criminals talking to each other about their crimes and what they're planning, and also offering to other criminals ideas about what they're capable of doing as a service.
As Director General of the Australian Signals Directorate, Rachel rarely allows cameras into her workplace. That's because what goes on here is top secret. Her team is our first line of defence against an ever-growing threat.
This is one of many criminals that are out there. This criminal, doesn't know that they're talking to someone in the Australian Signals Directorate.
For obvious reasons, we can't show you too much of what's on this screen. What are the most common activities? What are they getting up to in there?
They're selling access. They will promise that they can get you access to individual accounts. They're selling malicious code that they've written that might be able to steal your login and password as you go into your banking app, for example. And then, of course, once they have your login and password, then your bank account is open to them. They'll also sell data sets. So when we see big data breaches, sadly, where your personal information might have been stolen, on the dark web, they will sell big data sets with people's personal information, which a different criminal could then use to target you personally.
That's one side of the battle we face. But the other side is the terrifying implications for national security. How often do you see major breaches or attempted attacks on our critical infrastructure, our national security systems?
We see those pretty much every day, and it is a bad day though when one of those hackers gets through those defences.
A cyber attack against Optus has compromised the identities of more than 9 million Australians.
It's happened a lot in the last year, with Australians hit by several major cyber incidents.
One of the nation's biggest port operators remains crippled tonight due to a cyber attack.
Earlier this month, the target was DP World, the company responsible for 40% of Australia's maritime freight and the flow of international trade. When you get that phone call, in this instance, major trade under threat, hacked, it must get the adrenaline going.
Look, it does a little bit. I get these phone calls regularly. My only concern and focus is protecting my neighbours, my community and citizens around this country.
When major incidents occur,
so tell me where we're up to.
Claire O'Neill is in the hot seat. As the country's first cybersecurity minister, she has the enormous responsibility of finding out who is trying to harm us. The DP World did go to show it is very alarming that cybercriminals can so successfully target our infrastructure, our trade routes.
The DP World incident was really serious, and if truth be told, this is one that could have affected the lives of almost everyone who lives in our country.
How concerned are you about malicious state actors targeting our critical infrastructure, given our current strategic environment?
State actors are a really big part of the cybercrime problem for our country. We have, in some instances, state actors who are using parts of their government to target Australians. In other instances, such as Russia, where the government is essentially turning a blind eye to massive cyber gangs that are operating in their country.
Which state actors pose the biggest threat to us?
Countries like China, like Russia, like Iran are those that the Australian Signals Directorate has publicly identified as those who are part of the mix here.
And there's no knowing how far they're prepared to go. As you'll see, our most closely guarded national secrets are in the firing line.
It's a threat which is present and active as we speak, and in that sense, it requires defence right now.
Australia could soon be at war, or so we're constantly warned. In fact, the government is so concerned, in the past year, it signed the biggest ever defence deal in our history to build nuclear submarines to protect our land and surrounding waters. It's Defence Minister Richard Marles' job to know all about the Frontline. But he's now facing conflict online as well. Have we seen attacks or attempted attacks on our defence systems?
We do see an increasing interest from other state actors in our critical infrastructure, and that obviously includes defence.
So does that mean Russia and China have attempted to hack or strike our critical infrastructure?
Well, again, I'm reluctant to go there in probably the way you would want me to.
Why is the government reluctant to call out those state actors?
Well, we do from time to time, but we do so on a case-by-case basis and for a range of reasons. And a lot of those might be around the protection of our own people and our own movements and systems.
He mightn't want to say it, but the Defence Minister's great fear is that $300 billion worth of nuclear submarines are at risk. How concerned are you that AUKUS could be targeted?
Well, I think that we are very vigilant about protecting something such as that.
To give people an understanding, what would be the ramifications of that if there were to be some sort of cyber attack strike on AUKUS?
Firstly, it's intelligence in the sense that it's other actors having complete visibility of what you're doing. What defines a submarine capability is stealth. If they can be detected, there is literally no point to them.
It's a scenario our smartest cyber fighting minds have spent years preparing for. Catherine Manstead, Director of Cyber Intelligence at CyberCX, advises the government and the private sector on how to avoid and respond to hacking incidents. The government's constantly telling us we're in the most difficult strategic circumstances in decades. I mean, let's talk hypotheticals. China invades Taiwan, it's on, and now we can see how a foreign government like that could access and sabotage our critical infrastructure.
That's a reasonable scenario to consider. It would be very surprising to me if a lot of countries around the world weren't thinking about what would it look like if there was a conflict closer to home and how might that play out in cyberspace? Because there are a lot of foreign governments, not just China and Russia, that see cyberspace as their playground and that will try and seek influence to coerce democracies and Western democracies like Australia using cyber attacks if that's where the state of the relations deteriorates too.
It's a frightening thought, not just for our Defence Force, but our law enforcement too. The problem is, there are so many crooks out there, when one gets caught, another one comes along.
They're shutting down some of the cybercrime forums where they operate, where they buy and sell access to Australian organisations, for example. But the reality is, for every shutdown that we have seen to date, almost immediately we see more criminals jump up to take their place. So we need to do more of that disruption, but we need to do it at a much bolder scale, and we have to do that not just as Australians, but working with police forces overseas to make a real dent.
It's almost impossible to keep up, isn't it?
Look, it's not impossible. We've got things on our side, like highly capable technologies. If we focus and put that effort into seeing this as what it is, the dominant crime type of the 21st century, and we focus on it like we've focused on organised crime, terrorism and other major crime waves before, I think we can do this, but it does require that mindset shift.
At that stage, we'll make a decision on...
There's no better man for the job than Australian Federal Police Assistant Commissioner of Cyber, Scott Lee. Fresh from leading counter-terrorism operations, his target is now cyber criminals. I think there is a perception among the Australian public that the bad guys are winning.
The community may not necessarily see the policing response, but I can assure the Australian public that both ourselves and our international partners are taking action every day.
With intelligence provided by the Australian Signals Directorate, our federal police hunt for the most serious cyber criminals, at home and overseas. It's one thing to find them, but quite another to catch them. And, as we've seen in the case of last year's Medibank hack, bringing them to justice is another story altogether.
There are instances where that just won't be possible given the jurisdictions that these individuals are based in. So we undertake and share information where, even if it's not necessarily a prosecution in Australia, that some of these individuals might be arrested and charged and prosecuted in a foreign jurisdiction.
The reality is, disrupting cyber criminals doesn't stop them, as Sarah Luke knows all too well. She spent the past year battling to clear her name in the US courts after hackers stole her identity, accessed her PayPal information and used it to commit fraud. How often did you use your PayPal account?
Hardly ever, actually. So I've owned it for 8 years and I've used it twice a year for 8 years. And then all of a sudden, in 2 days, there were 250 transactions that went through my account.
Were you surprised by the scale of it and the speed of it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. The speed, how they got into my account, and then the transactions are huge. Like it's immediate, and there's so many of them.
It's the damage is done before you even know about it.
Absolutely. So by the time I got the email from PayPal to flag that they'd changed the email address. The damage, this had already been done.
It was too late.
It's too late, yeah.
Sarah's hope is that common sense will prevail and the case against her will be dismissed. What's it like for you having that hanging over your head and constantly in the back of your mind?
It's an enormous point of stress and anxiety. It's unnerving. I go to sleep at night not knowing if there's going to be a knock on the door, if there's going to be some heavy people there going to take me away. I don't know. I have no idea. I just don't even know what it looks like. And no one has been able to explain to me what that's going to look like.
Cybersecurity Minister Claire O'Neill concedes as we face this cyber reckoning, the government can't manage it alone. It has to be a shared burden. Is this something that we all just have to accept now in this modern digital world, that at some point all Australians are going to be targeted?
I don't think we should accept that we're going to be a nation of cybercrime victims. Absolutely not. And it's part of my job to make sure that doesn't happen. One thing I do want Australians to understand, and part of our cyber strategy, is making sure that people know that if you do some simple things, you can vastly reduce the risk of cybercrime. You know, we've all been using the internet over many years, living in a dreamland, using the same password for all of our different sites, not putting on two-factor authentication when we need to. That's got to end. Australian citizens need to change, but business and government need to step up too.
Hello, I'm Amelia Adams. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for our brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. And don't miss out on our extra minute segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au and the 9Now app.